It's mid-morning when Betty Bursinger, on the way to the shops, walks down Norton Avenue in the Leimert Park area of the city, which was largely underdeveloped at the time. For her, it's a normal day, until she goes past an undeveloped building plot, and something catches her eye that looked out of the ordinary. Taking a brief glance, she thought it was a discarded shop window mannequin, as it looked so white. But something was just not right, and she was correct. She realized that what she was actually looking at was the corpse of a woman severed in two. She ran in panic to contact the police. This photo of Betty was staged by the press a few days after she had made her grim discovery and made the call to the police to alert them to what she had found. The photo was used by newspapers for sensationalized articles that were subsequently published about the case. When the LAPD arrived, they found a gruesome but also an unusual sight. The naked body was split in half at the waist, and pieces of her flesh had been cut away from her body. And while she was severely mutilated, there was not a spot of blood on the ground, suggesting that the victim had been killed elsewhere, and the body had been thoroughly cleaned before being dumped at that spot by the road. Who was she? And what was the backstory that had led her to this terrible end? And why was the crime named after a flower? The body was completely drained of blood, leaving her skin a pallid white, which had led to Betty Bursinger thinking it was a shop dummy. The medical examiners determined that she had been dead for around 10 hours prior to the discovery, leaving her time of death either sometime during the previous evening or the early morning hours of the following day. The body had apparently been washed by the killer. The face had been slashed from the corners of her mouth to her ears, creating an effect known as the Glasgow smile. She had several cuts to her body, where entire portions of flesh had been sliced away. The lower half of the corpse was positioned a foot away from the upper part, and her intestines had been tucked neatly beneath her backside. She had, it would appear, that she had been posed, with her hands over her head, her elbows bent at right angles, and her legs spread apart. An autopsy of the body was performed the day after it was discovered by Frederick Newbar, the LA coroner. His detailed report says that the victim was 5 foot 5 inches tall and weighed 115 pounds, had light blue eyes, black hair, and badly decayed teeth. There were ligature marks on her ankles, wrists, and neck, and an irregular laceration with superficial tissue loss on her chest. Newbar also noted superficial cuts on the right forearm, left upper arm, and the lower left side of her body. She had been completely cut in half by a technique taught in the 1930s called hemiocorporectomy. The report noted very little bruising along the incision line, suggesting it had been performed after death. There were lacerations on each side of the face, which extended from the corners of the lips and were measured at 3 inches on the right side and 2.5 inches on the left. The skull was not fractured, but there was bruising noted on the front and right side of her scalp, consistent with blows to the head. The cause of death was determined to be hemorrhaging from the lacerations to her face and the shock from blows to the head. The report noted that there were indications that she may have been raped, and samples were taken from her body for testing, but the results came back negative. The ensuing investigation was led by the LA Police Department, and the identity of the body was soon discovered. The FBI was asked to help, and it quickly identified the body, apparently in just 56 minutes, after getting blurred fingerprints via a primitive fax machine, also commonly used by news services. The young woman turned out to be a 22-year-old Hollywood hopeful named Elizabeth Short, later dubbed the Black Dahlia. Short's prints actually appeared twice in the FBI's massive collection. First, she had applied for a job as a clerk at the commissary of the Army's Camp Cook in California in January 1943. Second, she had been arrested by the Santa Barbara police for underage drinking 7 months later. The Bureau also had her photo on its files and provided it to the press. In a cruel twist, immediately following the identification, reporters from William Randolph Hearst's Los Angeles Examiner contacted her mother, Phoebe Short, in Boston, and told her that her daughter had won a beauty contest. It was only after prying as much personal information as they could from her that the reporters revealed that her daughter had in fact been murdered. The Examiner also offered to pay Phoebe's airfare and accommodation if she would travel to Los Angeles to help with the police investigation. That was, in fact, yet another ploy, since the newspaper wanted to keep her away from the police and other reporters to protect their scoop. The Examiner and another Hearst newspaper, the Herald Express, later sensationalized the case, with one article describing the black tailored suit Short was last seen wearing. She acquired the nickname of the Black Dahlia posthumously, as newspapers at the time often liked, for particularly lurid crimes, to have a catchy title, and it was invented by reporters covering the murder because Short had striking dyed black hair and her penchant for sheer black clothing. They also dubbed her an adventuress who prowled Hollywood Avenue. As far as the investigation was concerned, the police now had a name to work on and find out who the victim was. Elizabeth Short was born on July the 29th, 1924, in Boston, Massachusetts, the third of 5 daughters. Her father built miniature golf courses until he lost most of his savings in the 1929 stock market crash. In 1930, his car was found abandoned on the Charlestown Bridge, and it was assumed that he had jumped into the river. Believing her husband to be dead, Short's mother began working as a bookkeeper to support the family. Troubled by bronchitis and severe asthma attacks, Short underwent lung surgery aged 15, after which doctors suggested she periodically relocate to a milder climate to prevent further respiratory problems. Her mother sent her to spend winters with family friends in Miami for the next 3 years. In late 1942, Short's mother received a letter of apology from her presumed deceased husband, which revealed that he was in fact alive and had started a new life in California. Short relocated to Vallejo to live with her father, who she had not seen since she was 6. At the time, her father was working at the nearby Mare Island Naval Shipyard in San Francisco Bay. Arguments between the two of them led to her moving out in January 1943. She got a job at Camp Cook, briefly living with a United States Army Air Force sergeant who reportedly abused her. She left after 6 months and moved to Santa Barbara, where she was arrested on September the 23rd for drinking at a local bar while underage. Having got away with a light punishment, it was time to leave, and she traveled to Florida, where she met Major Matthew Gordon, a decorated Army Air Force officer who was training for deployment to Southeast Asia. Shortly later, she told friends that Gordon had written to propose marriage while he was recovering from injuries from a plane crash in India. She accepted his offer, but Gordon, unbelievably, died in a second crash on August the 10th, 1945. In July the following year, she moved to Los Angeles to visit Army Air Force Lieutenant Joseph Fickling, an acquaintance from Florida who was stationed in Long Beach. She would spend the last months of her life in Southern California, mostly in the Los Angeles area. Shortly prior to her murder, she had been working as a waitress and rented a room behind the Florentine Gardens nightclub on Hollywood Boulevard. Short has been variously described and depicted as a would-be actress. According to some sources, she did in fact have aspirations to be a film star, though she had no known acting jobs or credits. In 1947, on the 9th of January, Short returned to her home in Los Angeles after a brief trip to San Diego with Robert Manley, a 25-year-old married salesman she had been dating. Manley later told police that he dropped Short off at the Biltmore Hotel in downtown LA, and that Short was to meet one of her sisters, who was visiting from Boston that afternoon. By some accounts, staff of the Biltmore recalled having seen Short using the lobby telephone. Soon after, she was seen by patrons of the Crown Grill Cocktail Lounge at 754 South Olive Street, a few minutes' walk from the hotel. A number of people, none of whom knew Short, contacted police and newspapers, claiming to have seen her during her so-called missing week, between her January the 9th disappearance and the discovery of her body on January the 15th. Police and the district attorney ruled out each alleged sighting. In some cases, those interviewed were identifying other women whom they had mistaken for Short. Her whereabouts in the days leading up to her murder and the discovery of her body remained unknown. On January the 21st, a person claiming to be Short's killer made a phone call to the office of James Richardson, the editor of The Examiner, congratulating him on the newspaper's coverage of the case and stating he planned on eventually turning himself in, but not before allowing police to pursue him further. The caller also told Richardson to expect some souvenirs of Short in the post. 3 days later, a suspicious manila envelope was discovered addressed to the Los Angeles Examiner and other Los Angeles papers, with individual words that had been cut out and pasted from newspaper clippings. A large message on the face of the envelope read, "Here are Dahlia's belongings. Letter to follow." The envelope contained Short's birth certificate, business cards, photographs, names written on pieces of paper, and an address book with the name Mark Hansen embossed on the cover. The packet had been carefully cleaned with petrol, similar to Short's body, which led police to suspect the packet had been sent directly by her killer. Despite efforts to clean the parcel of any evidence, several partial fingerprints were lifted from the envelope and sent to the FBI for testing. The prints were compromised in transit and so could not be properly analysed. The same day, a handbag and a black suede shoe were reported to have been seen on top of a rubbish bin in an alley a short distance from Norton Avenue, 2 miles from the crime scene. The items were recovered by police, but they had also been wiped clean with petrol, destroying any fingerprints. Detectives quickly deemed Hansen, the owner of the address book, was a suspect. He was a wealthy local nightclub and theatre owner, and an acquaintance of mutual friends of Short's. According to some sources, Hansen also confirmed that the handbag and shoe discovered in the alley were in fact Short's. Anne Toth, Short's friend and flatmate, told investigators that Short had recently rejected advances from Hansen and suggested it as a potential motive for him to kill her. He was cleared of suspicion in the case, Police also interviewed several people found listed in the address book, but were still no further forward finding the culprit. A total of 750 investigators from the LAPD worked on the Short case during its initial stages, and they interviewed over 150 men in the following weeks, who they believed to be potential suspects. Various locations were searched for possible evidence, including storm drains throughout Los Angeles, abandoned buildings, and various sites along the river. The searches yielded no further information. On March the 14th, an apparent suicide note scrawled in pencil on a bit of paper was found tucked in a shoe in a pile of men's clothing by the ocean's edge at Venice Beach. The note read, "To whom it may concern, I have waited for the police to capture me for the Black Dahlia killing, but have not. I am too much of a coward to turn myself in, so this is the best way out for me. I couldn't help myself for that, or this. Sorry." The pile of clothing was first seen by a beach caretaker, who reported the discovery to the West LA police. The clothes gave no clue about the identity of the owner. On January the 26th, another letter was received by the examiner, this time handwritten, which read, "Here it is. Turning in Wednesday, Jan 29th, 10 a.m. Had my fun at police. Black Dahlia Avenger." The letter also named a location at which the supposed killer would turn himself in. Police waited at the spot on the morning of the 29th, but the alleged killer did not appear. Instead, at 1 p.m., the examiner officers received another cut and pasted letter which read, "Have changed my mind. You would not give me a square deal. Dahlia killing was justified." The graphic nature of the murder and the subsequent letters received by the examiner had resulted in a media circus surrounding Short's murder. Both local and national publications heavily covered the story, many of whom reprinted sensationalistic reports suggesting that she had been tortured for hours prior to her death. This information was false, yet police allowed the reporters to circulate it so they could conceal Short's true cause of death, cerebral hemorrhage, from the public. Further reports about her personal life were publicized, including details about her alleged declining of Hanson's advances. A stripper, who was an acquaintance of Short's, told police that she liked to get guys worked up over her, but she'd leave them hanging dry. On February the 1st, the Los Angeles Daily News reported that the case had run into a stone wall, with no new leads for investigators to pursue. Newspapers continued to run stories on the murder and the investigation, which was front-page news for 35 days following the discovery of the body. Investigators told the press that they were of the opinion that they believed Short's murder had taken place in a remote building on the outskirts of the city, and that her body was transported to the location where it was disposed of. Based on the precise cuts and dissection of the corpse, the police looked into the possibility that the murderer had been a surgeon, doctor, or someone with medical knowledge. In mid-February 1947, the police served a warrant on the University of Southern California Medical School, which was located near the site where the body had been discovered, requesting a complete list of the program's students. The university agreed, so long as the students' identities remained private. Background checks were conducted, but yielded no results. By the spring, Short's murder had become a cold case with few new leads. One of the detectives on the case blamed the press for compromising the investigation through journalist probing of details and unverified reporting. In the aftermath of the grand jury, further investigation was done on Short's past, with detectives tracing her movements between Massachusetts, California, and Florida, and also interviewed people who knew her in Texas and New Orleans. Once again, the interviews yielded no useful information about the murder. The notoriety of the case has spurred a large number of confessions over the years, many of which have been deemed false. During the initial investigation, police received a total of 60, mostly made by men. Since then, over 500 people have confessed to the crime, some of whom had not even been born at the time of the death. One of the LAPD investigators commented on the case that it was amazing how many people offered up a relative as the killer. In 2003, Ralph Asdell, one of the original detectives, told the LA Times that he believed he had interviewed Short's killer, a man who had been seen with his car parked near the crime scene in the early morning hours of January the 15th. A neighbor driving by that day stopped to dispose of a bag of lawn clippings in the empty site when he saw a parked car, allegedly with its right rear door open. The driver was a worker at a local restaurant who was ultimately cleared of suspicion. Although he was never formally charged concerning the crime, George Hoddle came to wider attention after his death when he was accused by his son, LAPD murder detective Steve Hoddle, of killing Short and committing several additional murders, including being accused of raping his own daughter, but was acquitted. He was suspected, but not charged, with the death of his secretary, Ruth Spaulding. Hoddle fled the country more than once and lived in the Philippines between 1950 and 1990. Steve Hoddle said his father's training as a surgeon could be seen as circumstantial evidence. In 2003, it was revealed in notes from the 1949 grand jury report that investigators had bugged George Hoddle's home and obtained a recorded conversation of him with an unidentified visitor, saying, "Supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia, they couldn't prove it now. They can't talk to my secretary because she's dead. They thought there was something fishy. Anyway, now they may have figured it out. Killed her. Maybe I did kill my secretary." It has been theorized that there could be a link between the Black Dahlia murder and the Cleveland Torso murders, which took place in the Ohio City between 1934 and 1938. As part of their investigation into other murders that took place before and after the Short killing, the original LAPD investigators studied the Torso murders in 1947, but later discounted any connection between the two cases. In 1980, new evidence implicating a former suspect, Jack Wilson, was investigated in relation to Short's murder. Police had claimed that they were close to arresting Wilson, but that he had died in a fire. Between 1943 and 1949, over a dozen unsolved murders occurred in Los Angeles, which involved the mutilation of young, attractive women. Authorities suspected at the time that they could have been the work of a single, unidentified serial killer. In 1949, a Los Angeles County grand jury was tasked with investigating the failure on the part of law enforcement to solve the cases. As a result, further investigation was done on the murders, although none of them were ever solved. Elizabeth Short's murder is one of the oldest in Los Angeles County and has been described as one of the most brutal and culturally enduring crimes in U.S. history. Time magazine listed it as one of the most infamous unsolved cases in the world.